Okay, so now we're gonna get into solving equations where there's our squares and cubes involved. And it's really the same things. I mean, you just have to understand your squares and cubes. I know in the beginning they're not familiar to you, but I always recommend you know your most common squares up to even 15. Like I would know like 5 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared, 10 squared, all the way up to 15 squared. Like this is important. And then cube, I will go up to maybe 5 or 6 cube, and that's really it. I mean, probably the most you'll probably need to know. So I would like try to learn those. So let's start with the first one. X squared equals to 16. So how do you solve that? Remember, opposite of square is square root, right? So you take the square root of both sides. And what's the square root of 16? What times what is 16? It's 4. But when you take a square and even, okay, when you take an even root here, and even, there's a 2 here that you don't see. When you take a square root, it's kind of like the same thing as 1x. You don't write the 1x, right? But you know there's a 1 in front of it. Same thing with square root is that there's a 2 there, okay? When you ever take anything with an even integer, an even one, it becomes plus and minus, okay? So the answer is x equals to plus or minus 4. And why is that, you think about? It's because if you multiply negative 4 times negative 4, what's negative times negative? Is positive. So anytime there's an even number of negatives, it's going to become a positive. And that's why there's two solutions. And that's why there's a negative and a positive answer when you do anything with an even root. Okay? So I'll explain more of that when we start getting into exponents and radicals, and you'll start seeing more of these kind of problems into more depth, and you'll understand what I mean. So let's go to the next problem. All I do is add a 3 in front of it and see what happens. So you have 3x squared equals to 75, okay? So what do you do first? Same thing, you divide by 3. Okay, 3 over 3 because it's 3 times x squared, so that's why I'm dividing by 3, okay? X squared equals to 25, okay? 75 divided by 3 is 25. So x squared equals 25. What times what is 25? Okay, so square root of 25, so it's 5, right? Right? So, and remember, since I'm doing an even root, it's plus or minus. So it's plus or minus 5. Not just 5, it's plus and minus 5. Because negative 5 squared is really 25, right? So you got to think about that way. So next problem is now we get x squared equals to negative 100, okay? So what do you do here? Take the square root, right, on both sides. But here's the thing. What times what is a negative 100? Well, is it possible that a number times itself will ever be a negative? It's impossible. So you cannot take the square root of a negative number. You can't do that. Same thing, like you can't divide by 0, okay? You can't divide by 0 and you can't take a square root of negative number, okay? So the answer here is really no set. There's no answer, no solution. You cannot do that. That's how you write no solution. There's no set. Actually, no set. Sorry, I'm thinking of something else. No set. Okay. So next problem now, we have x squared equals 4/25. There's those fractions again. They never leave, don't they? So you're doing x squared equals 4/25. What do? Same thing, take square root. There's nothing different. Okay? So this becomes x. Okay? So square root of 4/25. So how do you do that? You can actually divide the square root, you can change it up like this. You can split it up. That's one of the theorems with square roots, okay, with the roots. And square root of 4 is just, what, 2, right? And square root of 25 is just 5. But remember, you're taking a square root, an even root, so it's plus or minus. Remember, write that in there, okay? When you take the square root, you have a plus and minus. So the answer is plus or minus 2/5, okay? So that's all the squares. Let me know if you have any questions about the squares. There's always different scenarios that you might, want to know. So let's start with the basic with cubes. Now we're done with squares. Let's head on to cubes. X cubed equal to 8. So you gotta know your cubes. Like I said, up to, remember, like 5 or 6. 5 cubed, 6 cubed. After that, there's not too many 7 cube kind of questions. I mean, they don't expect that from you unless you're doing like math contest problems. You don't really get that. X cubed equals 8. What is that? So you take the cube root of 8. So instead of taking a square root, now you're taking the cube root. See, but you write that there because if you don't write it there, it's assumed that's a 2. Okay. So the cube root of 8, what times what times what? 3 times is 8. The answer is 2. Okay? So let's go to the next problem. So we have 4x cubed equals to 408. Okay? So what do you do first? Same thing over here. You divide by 3 here, so you divide by 4 here. There's 4 times, so you divide. And so you get x cubed here, okay, equals to 108 over 4, which is 27. Okay? And you're going to see another familiar kind of cube that you should know. 2 cubed is 8. What cube do you think is 27? 3 cubed, okay? So you know it's cube root of 27 is going to be 3. So x is equal to 3, okay? So cube root of 27 is 3, okay? So the answer is 3 to this problem. Let me label it like this so you don't... Oops. Okay. So this is problem number 3, okay? X cubed is equal to negative 64. Now remember in the last problem here is x squared equals to negative 100. What's the solution to that? No solution. You can't, because 2 negative numbers can never be multiplied, can never be a negative. But over here, there's a negative here. Is that possible if you do cube root? Well, if it's an odd number, it's possible. Only if it's odd, you can make it a negative, okay? So what number, let's do the positive first scenario first. Cube root of 64 is what? So you think about it, okay? 4 times what? 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64, right? So you know 4 will work as a cube. Now, since it's negative, since you're doing an odd one, it would be negative 4 will work, right? Because negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, and 16 times negative 4 is negative 64, right? Right? So this becomes x, and then this becomes negative 4. Now you notice there's no positive 4 here. So when you do any roots, that's an odd number, you don't have that plus or minus. Only if it's an even one, you do plus or minus. And a lot of people don't explain that, and the books don't really do a good job explaining that. So I want you to see the difference between, we're taking an even root, like a square root or a fourth root or sixth root, later on you'll learn that, is always plus or minus. But if you're doing an odd root, like 3, any odd number root, you're going to get, you know, if it's negative 4, it's just negative 4. It's no plus or minus. Because plus 4 would be 64. So only negative 4 becomes negative 64 when you cube it. Okay? So let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to do more problems if you have any more suggestions.